And just so you know, the two singers have colds. This is going to be fun.
Oh yeah, sing your hearts out. Help us out, guys. these are gifts, to be here with one another in fellowship, and just to have our minds completely focused on Him. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, good morning. Really, it's been a little while. I'm super excited to be back with all of you.
Thank you. Trying to put together how many years it's been since I've been here. Not quite long enough that I had hair last time, but a little while anyway. My kids were quite small when I was here frequently, so it's kind of fun to be back, surreal in a lot of ways. I don't do this much anymore. I have a sprinkler business that I get to work at every day, which is my main thing these days, but it is a joy to be a part of these things when I can. I am often, these days, with my family and friend group, the person who is around and available easily for weddings and funerals, so that's a lot of where I spend my pastoral time these days, which is an interesting subset of this church thing that we do. When you see people at the start of something big and at the end of something big, is a nice place to be. But nevertheless, here I am. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I wanted to talk this morning with just a note of a customer of mine. She lives in Boulder. Maybe you'll run across her someday. I won't tell you her name. I don't know that she'd appreciate it. She is a particular person, and a cause for lots of good smiles and memories with the people who work with me. I've worked at the Sprinklers for about 10 years, I think, 9 or 10 years, and she's 96, so I met her when she was 86 or 87. She has been on her own that whole time. She has kids. Her husband died many, many years ago, but her grown kids, obviously quite grown, are not at home. And the whole time I've known her, she has been chasing squirrels in her yard. And the first time I met her, we had an appointment to see her, and we showed up, and we walk around back through the gate because she's going to be there. That just is where she is. She's always there. She's not late to stuff or not showing up. But there she is. She's in the backyard in one of her maple trees, in a ladder, had climbed up the maple trees at 86, 87, and has like a broom that she's whacking at a squirrel nest in her tree. And so she's comes down because we're there, talks about how much she hates squirrels. They chew things and get all over her yard, which is true. Have seen her just about every year since then, and we have regular conversations about the squirrels in her tree. In her 96th year, she's not as able to get in trees anymore, which is shocking, I know. But she asked me last time I'm there, do you see any squirrel nests up there? And I don't know, I didn't. I don't know if I did see any squirrel nests if I would tell her, because I'm afraid she might go get them. But she is remarkably interested in eliminating squirrels from her backyard. That is a passion of hers, if you could say it that way. And so she just came to mind as just an intro into kind of people that kind of persist and are passionate about something. It reminded me of another movie It's years old now. It's about a high school football coach. It's called, what's it called? Undefeated. About a high school football coach in Memphis, Tennessee, who has a career, decided to take over coaching of a school that could never get a coach, could never hire the right person, a school with some needs, in a neighborhood with some needs. And just because of who he was and his influence in his community, he brought along a lot of friends to help him. So they had a really invested full staff at a school that is not the norm. They had a really quality, high-level, good people investing in kids in a situation where kids don't get a lot of investment in them. And he, year after year, continued to pour into this community and these kids. And the year that the movie's made, it's a documentary, they start to win, of course. I mean, there's got to be some kind of silver lining. But more importantly, you see kind of change. You see, and some kids not change, but you see investment in people who care about kids who need to be cared about. And it's a consistent thing. And then through this movie, he and his colleagues, they get burned a lot by tough relationships, by hard situations, by kids who are in trauma or are traumatized, and they are consistently pursuing those kids. And it's just a beautiful thing. It's a great movie. I would recommend it if you're interested in kind of intersection of sports and relationships. It's a good one. And another one, and this one is probably one that hits closest to me, is I don't know if you know who Brian Stevenson is. Probably most of you do. He is a lawyer, an advocate. He wrote, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget what he wrote. Can anybody name the book turned into a movie? Just Mercy, thank you. He wrote a great book about his first kind of step into getting somebody off a death row that was unfairly put there. And then so he has since created a nonprofit, and it has many tentacles in this world, but he is consistently pursuing justice for people who were not served by the justice system. And I think you dip your toe into that world a little bit, it doesn't take long to realize that is a lot of people who were not treated well by our justice system. And it tends to skew towards people of color, towards people without money. I don't think we'd be surprised to know that, but his passion is that way. And he's created, in the last, I think it's been less than 5 years maybe, he has a museum in Birmingham that's from enslavement to mass incarceration. And just by the name of the museum, you know where his point of view is. He has a memorial in Birmingham about the lynching memorial that has sought to collect lynching information from all over the country. So if there's a county in your state where they have some history of a lynching to happen, they have a monument at this place remembering those people. And there's 2 in Colorado, at least 2 that I remember. I think there's only 2, but of lynchings that have happened here in our state, which surprised me. I didn't realize. I had naively thought and probably misjudged that that's the South's problem. You can go there and find that's not quite the case. But he pursues this thing. And I think in Birmingham, I don't know if many people here have spent much time in the South. I grew up in Texas, which is kind of a hybrid South state, and certainly not in the deep South like Alabama, Mississippi. I haven't spent much time there. But my sense there is his pursuit of, from enslavement to mass incarceration, his pursuit of lynching being something that we talk about, that people are honored, those lives were honored, and not just forgotten, that it was a real thing, real people did this to real people, that kind of pursuit, that is a tough prospect there in Birmingham. That's not everybody's point of view. In fact, there's a part in the museum, I'd never seen this before. As a history major, it was really eye-catching to me. You go in real early, and you see a map of Birmingham at the time of the Birmingham was a big place where they did slave auctions. At the time of some slave auctions, and you can see real clearly, because Birmingham hasn't changed a lot, you can see where that happened, where that took place, and then a lot of the buildings that still are there that were from that time. And it had, this is the part that's unique, it had people's names, family names, of families still in Birmingham, wealthy families still in Birmingham who made their fortunes off of the slave trade, off of enslaving other people. And it was a real pointed way. I think in America we'd like to forget that. We'd like to acknowledge that happened in our past, but we sure don't want my family's name to be drug into it. That was a long time ago. That was my great, whatever. That has nothing to do with me. He and his team, the people, were pointing out that this still has a legacy. There's money in this town that is here because they enslaved other people. Very hard stance in Birmingham, Alabama. But he pursues it persistently. He's a great person to know his story and to see where he's coming from. That movie is a good one too, I think. And I would highly recommend you end up in Birmingham someday, that you go there to the museum and the memorial. It is a really remarkable place. But a story of a person and a group of people who didn't give up, who pursue justice in the face of injustice continually over and over and over again. And so, as we kind of get into this morning, I wondered if you guys had times, like me, where you have given up on something prematurely, the other side of persistence, where you started off with every intention of doing whatever. I mean, I have a handful of house projects that are unfinished and in need of the last couple steps. I have so many good intentions about how I want to parent my kids or love my wife or take care of my employees or those kind of things that, boy, they're great and they're justice-minded, but there's not consistency there. So I just want to throw out a couple examples and maybe draw you into where you maybe have some of these things, where you have memories of maybe not sacrificing your comfortable position at the cost of advocating for somebody, or whatever it is, wherever the persistent justice pursuit looked like for you. Some that came to mind: turning your head from corruption at work. Have you passed the same person who makes their home on the streets without being moved to act in their life? That was a tough one. When I was at this community many years ago, a big part of what I pursued passionately here was our relationship in this community with people on the streets. And I learned at that time I had a blind spot for people on the streets. They were just noise, like visual noise to me. I can walk down Pearl Street and not notice them. And then I started to get to know those people, and they were people. And I started to see them in relief. They weren't just a thing, a distraction on the side. They were people in front of me. I wonder if you've made that jump before. Maybe you've stopped fighting for your marriage. You've given up on the goodness that God can change in your relationship. Have you traded years of influence at work or in a community to move and pursue the ever-present green pasture? Maybe you stopped praying for the gospel to manifest its presence in your child's life, in your parents' life, in your neighbor's life, in your friend's life. In these situations, our passage this morning has something to say. What do you know? Jesus had something to say about it. I think that's quite true in so many things. But I wonder if you would turn to Luke 18 if you want. If you'd rather listen and have it soak over you that way, that is certainly a reasonable way to approach the gospel, seeing how it was mostly spoken and listened to and not read for its life. So it seems like a good place to be, okay. So Luke 18, the first verse. This is Jesus teaching a parable. So let's just pause for a second and say what a parable is in a big scheme. Doesn't hurt to remind. This is not a woman who existed who did these things. This is an example of a story that has a larger implication to teach us something. In fact, Luke goes out of his way. Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them how they should always pray and not give up. So this is a parable about something. Prayer here, in this case, is a little, at least from the angle that I'm taking this morning with us, is a little bit different than what I think Jesus is saying. And the Greek would allow us a little bit of room here. This is a parable about a woman seeking justice. And she does it, and Jesus would suggest, She, you, me, everybody can do that through prayer and not giving up. But here we go. Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. Verse 2, he said that in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared what people thought. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with a plea, "Grant me justice against my adversary." For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, "Even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice, so that she won't eventually come and attack me. And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" And so this woman, she's introduced to us with marginal status. This is a culture where women had not much, if any, legal rights. She would need an advocate to speak for her. She would need a male in her life to speak for her in this case. She didn't have that. Another way you could get justice taken care of is you could bribe somebody. I wonder if that still holds true, possibly. She didn't have that clearly either. She was without two big things in her life. Nobody to advocate for her, not the right people, and not money to make it happen. And this kind of exemplar of somebody on the margins is put against an exemplar of an unjust person, a person who cares nothing for what God says or what you think. So that's kind of against everything. A judge is evil in this sense, in a parable sense. He's evil. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about God. He's meant to be evil. He doesn't change his mind out of sympathy, but out of the tenaciousness of this widow, which is quite interesting. I think if I were listening to Luke be told this whole time, and I get to this parable, I would not have thought that the story's going to go, this woman doesn't give up, the judge changes his mind. I think there would be another angle here about how something got to his heart, or in some way he found, this would be a very kind of Old Testament Jewish sense, he found hardship and so was replaced with somebody with a kind heart or nothing. That's not the story. The story is marginalized person, marginalized identity against evil, wrong, unjustness, not going to give up, just doesn't care. This person continually battling that until that person crumbles. In fact, he says in the Greek, he's worried that she's going to give him a black eye. So before she gives me a black eye, I'm going to do something about it. So this widow, this woman, is quite passionate enough to worry somebody who doesn't care about what other people think. She goes way beyond her cultural script that's written for her, which makes her such a powerful example. All of us have a cultural script, right? I'm a white male, educated, married, I have all these marks of privilege in my life. I'm at a really privileged point of view, and so that has a certain script in our culture. Means certain things, even things I don't want it to mean, I still have that come with me. Whatever story you're coming from means certain things. I have a daughter who's a person of color, is adopted, who is learning another language, so she comes with all kinds of other things to this culture. This woman came with poverty and no male to speak for her, and yet she gets it. She gets what she wants. More importantly, she gets her justice from this evil man. God's response, how much more will God listen to you? Jesus does this a lot. Let me tell you a story about how people interact, and then let me give you the example of how much more God would do. Again, that's it here. Reminds me of Revelations 5 and Revelations 8. There's these two pictures in that book of these prayers of the people. They're spoken of as incense before the altar, or I think it's in 5, that there's a bowl of incense before the lamb and the lion, like that these prayers of God's people, the prayers of God's people crying out for justice are this fragrance before the very throne of God. Like that it matters, that people crying out for justice matters. How much more will God? This evil judge changed his mind. How much more will God? God sitting before your prayers of justice, how much more will he do on your behalf with your persistence? And he closes in the same place it started. Will my people have faith? He says, this is a story about somebody who has faith and didn't give up, somebody who prays and didn't give up. And at the end he says, will there be any faith when I get done? When I come back, will my people have faith? That is, will they pursue justice? Will they expect the goodness of God and be astoundingly persistent? All of that's here. All of that's in this little nugget. And I picture this woman that is chasing squirrel nests at 86 in her maple trees in her backyard. This is who I'm picturing here. This woman she would persistently battle an evil judge to get what she thought was justice. And I have this picture of the church that Jesus wants, this persistently battling, marginalized group of people to get justice, to get a noble cause. So how do we practice persistence? How do we pursue justice as a group of people? Does your heart break for something? That's a very churchy way of saying things, but I think you get it. Are you moved to compassion or outrage for something in your life, or something you read about, or something you've seen or experienced? This is where Brian Stevenson comes again. Does your outrage overflow in you when you find out? This is part of his story. That book is a little bit of his autobiography. He finds out how unjust the legal system is that put this person in death row. He finds out how flawed the trial was, how flawed his defense was, and it just created outrage in him. He could not stand it. And then the other side of that, does your heart just weep for sadness over how this goes, how it goes for some people? Do you see, I don't know what it is. My daughter would weep for the injustice of puppies in the puppy mill, like puppies being born and bred for this consumerism that we live in, while other puppies are being euthanized in shelters. I mean, that, whatever it is, where is your heart? I mean, this is something often that's going to start with your emotions. Where injustice starts for you, the thing that you're battling against is an emotional thing. And I probably don't need to point it out to you. I'm guessing you have a handful of things you're thinking of. That's because we're wired that way, just an aside. That's how Jesus made us, that we would seek justice in this world and think, this could be better. It doesn't have to be this way. Whenever my mind goes, it doesn't have to be this way, I know I'm onto something that's God's heart. It doesn't have to be this way. Like in Matthew 9, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like a sheep without a shepherd. Matthew 14, when Jesus landed and saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. What do you have compassion for? What do you have compassion towards? Like Jesus, our first movement is going to be emotional. Our compassion, our outrage is often what we need to act in. Number 2, remember you're not alone in this. You're the partner in this. This is not your thing. The reason you care about it is because God put it there. The reason you notice it is because it's a disconnect between the goodness of God and this fallen world we live in. You're not alone. This is God's thing. So you have responsibility. No one was going to take care of this widow's problem but the widow. It was her problem. She needed to be the instrument of change, but you're not alone. Luke 10, Jesus entrusts his disciples to go to all these villages, do these things. It's up to us. Romans 8:17, we are the co-heirs with Jesus in the kingdom of God. You get to work in this space. Romans 8 says the creation is groaning in pain in hopes of being liberated. All of that to say is when you step into justice, when you step into persistently pursuing justice in this world, you're going to find God there. There's this great story, great picture of how this works in Revelations, I think it's 19, maybe 20. Jesus is riding on his horse into battle, and he's out fighting all the bad things. He's just destroying all the stuff that we would like to be destroyed, all the evil, the hardships, the trauma. He's out there, and it occurs to the reader at that point, where do you find God? Is he back pointing to people to do the work, or is he in the field fighting for us? When you step into justice and pursuing it persistently, you're going to find God there. You won't be alone. And finally, if nothing else in this passage, the widow reminds us it's a little bit like the shampoo bottle says, rinse and repeat. And I'm just guessing, right? When you lose your energy for whatever God put on your heart, and we all do, boy do we. This sermon for me this week was a real stark reminder of all the different things I've lost or dropped or not taken full, not given my full heart to. Boy, do we ever lose those. You go back to the beginning and remember what you're fighting for. That again, when it triggers in, this is not the way it should be. When that outrage boils in you. That's God talking to you. The 12th step of the 12 steps says, having had a spiritual awakening, and as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other addicts and practice these principles in all our affairs. As a product of 12 steps, that 12th step is meant to be, I can paraphrase that as saying, do these 11 steps in your life continually. Do them continually. 12 steps they don't take for granted that you're going to lose your passion for this. You're not going to be the same person that got into addiction at the beginning and is desperate, and as so many people that are, you're at the bottom and you need something. You're going to progress in it. You're going to get healing, and you're going to find some freedom, and you're going to move along. And Numbers 12 says, and do that again, and remind yourself while you're in it, and do it again. Live the steps over and over and over and over again. That's how we do it. That's how you do it. What makes it hard, at least I can say for me, and anecdotally what I've noticed in other people, what makes this hard is when whatever we're passionate about is not resolved in the time we thought it should be. That's a real hiccup. What happens when God delays? What happens when his timing is not what we're timing? I mean, and I don't think you have to stretch too far in your memory to think of somebody who's kind of been an exemplar of somebody who pursues justice in your life. And you can see this person that they did it their whole life with no resolution, and they go to the grave with no resolution, but they pursue justice the whole time. So some of us, our justice pursuits in some areas is never going to stop. It won't ever go away. We'll never get it fixed. Will Brian Stevenson ever fix how messed up our criminal justice system is? I doubt it. Will he stop? I doubt it. What happens when God delays? That's the point of the last verse, I think. The pursuit of justice flows out of belief of who God is. Luke has established in this whole book of his the gracious goodness and the character of God. It becomes at some point about trusting God and his goodness, and that he will act like he says he will. If we're pursuing justice, if we're pursuing things of God, if we're out in the field where all the hardship is, and we find God out there, and it doesn't get resolved, do we trust that God's got it? That's hard for me. Much like this passage, the context of pursuing justice starts first in your community. Either this community of faith, your community where you live, your community in your family. It starts there. And then it moves out into the larger community. And maybe this is the place, if this community is known as a place where justice happens, a place where the things of God are pursued, then that has ripple effects into this community, into Boulder. It's always been that way. The thing that haunted me when I worked here was a question another pastor asked. He said, if Crestview closed its doors today, would anybody in Boulder notice? That's ultimately a justice question. is this place pursuing the persistently pursuing the acts of justice in a way in which people see it? So it starts in a smaller place and ripples out into the big. Whether it's the micro or the macro, it almost always starts there. So people who persistently pray for our family and friends and our neighbors, is that a way that you can do justice? Is it an opportunity, that reminder that in order to pray for somebody, you might need to know something about what's going on with them? If you want to pursue justice in relationships with your neighbors, is it helpful to know something about what your neighbor's life is like? If you want to pursue justice at work, is it helpful to know about what people's lives at work looks like? How do you do that? Well, the people that put feet to the prayers and persistently love people, a person who knows in their core that loving God looks a lot like loving people. There is this paradigm in Christianity. There's loving each other on this level and loving God on this level, right? And it just gets mixed. So much of pursuing God ends up pursuing and loving other people. So much of loving other people ends up pursuing and loving God. It's just that circle. It's just that bit that we can't predict, that because where we go, God will be there, we have to follow and love people. I have a couple stories of how I think some people in my life have done this well. There's Dr. Vernon Grounds, was at Denver Seminary when I was there. He had been there for 50 years. He was the emeritus professor there. He was president for some years in its history. And he would come a couple days a week to an office, and it was just to be a loving presence on campus. He reminded seminarians for 50 years, those of us, I'm included, that got stuck in the minutia of theology, who got stuck in the practice of preaching, who got stuck in how to do whatever it is that they're doing, or what it means to be doing those things. He reminded those students that his love transcends all, that it's God's love that wins the day. That's what he did for 50 years at that place. And there's nobody on that campus that had a bigger impact than me, and I never had a class with him. I probably spoke, 10 words to him, but I saw his role there over and over and over again. All of this is important, but this is what matters. Where we persistently lead, like my pastor, Kathy, who continually works to flatten leadership in the refuge in our church, to give people without a voice in our culture and without a voice in churches an equal seat at the table, who knows that community reflects the gospel and it begins on the margins. And there's a phrase I learned from, we took a trip to some missionaries in Haiti, and there was a phrase with a group there that said that grace pools in the low places. And that just struck me so profoundly, that God's grace finds its way down here. And I think there's a bit of that Kathy, my pastor, understands completely, that community, the gospel community, starts when people on the margins are included in all of it. There's, of course, examples of people in this room who are living in pursuit of justice, who have persistent life, not a perfect life, who wholeheartedly believe that you live a life of justice and that the circumstances change, but God does not. And I wanted to close with, as I was preparing this week, I stumbled across a podcast. I'm obsessed with podcasts. I'm obsessed with them. So it's to the point where I can't even remember sometimes what I've been listening to. But I remember this one quite well. Malcolm Gladwell does a podcast. He's an author that's written probably many things that you guys know. He does an amazing podcast. I was listening to a podcast of his this week where he talked about growing up in his town in Canada, that his town, the country of Canada, decided to accept refugees in partnership with communities. I know as North Americans, as people of the United States, that sounds really foreign to us, that we would accept refugees in partnership with communities. It's not very American. We have all these lists of how you get in this country. But in Canada, they have a very open door, and they accept a ton of refugees. And so his community, this small little town in Canada, accepted 3 people at the time. This was a big refugee population, 3 people from Vietnam. And he talks about how that happened. And it's just normal people in this town doing something that they would do anyway on behalf of these 3 people. It wasn't exceptional heroes. Kind of his point is, life happens when it's kindness, not heroics. That's kind of how Malcolm gets there. But he lands in this really powerful way on what I think God might be asking of us this morning. When I heard him, he had this group of people reflecting on these refugee stories. He had them read Matthew 25, this particular passage. He had them read it together, and I started to cry. This is what justice looks like. So if your heart hasn't been tugged in a certain direction, let me give you what Jesus would ask you to do this morning. It's Matthew 25, verse 34. The king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance in the kingdom, prepared for you since the creation of the world." Okay, these are the 2 verses that really hit it. "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." If you need a starting point, please take that. Look at what's happening in the world and follow that stuff. All right, will you pray for me? Pray with me? You can pray for me too. Jesus, we are thankful that you are here with us. We are thankful that as we pursue your justice in this world, that you'll be there with us. And I would ask that you fill our hearts with where it is you would ask us to be, and that you would give us endurance and patience and compassion and all the things we need to make that happen. Lord, we give to you this morning and the rest of this day, that it would be yours and that we would honor you in it. Amen. All right, go this week, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Amen.